Welcome to ENside Politics, the weekly podcast on all things political in San Antonio. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express News, and I'm joined today by City Hall reporter Molly Smith and our special guests, Father Jimmy Drennan and Sonia Rodriguez, leaders of COPS Metro. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So I wanted to start out talking baseball. So the Missions downtown baseball deal, which we really first became aware of back in July in a formal sense. That's when Bexar County Judge Peter Sakai and Mayor Ron Nirenberg announced that they were signing a letter of intent with Designated Bidders, which is the owner of the San Antonio Missions, to build a baseball stadium. Was this the first COPS Metro had heard of this deal?
Actually, yes. We had not heard very much about it at all. There was some rumblings that Major League Baseball was unhappy with Nelson Wolff Stadium. And so, it was rather new. And that's actually one of the things that has been a little disconcerting in this whole process is how these conversations are going on outside of the public purview.
Right.
And that's extremely unhealthy.
Now, I was one of the original reporters to, in fact, I'll just say it, Madison Eisler, a business reporter, and I broke the story of this local ownership group acquiring the Missions nearly 2 years ago for about $28 million. Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, we had sources telling us that the plan was to build a downtown baseball stadium that would probably involve a good deal of public financing. But COPS Metro wasn't aware of this?
There wasn't a whole lot of front burner conversations about it with the city.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually more retrospectively that we looked it up and said, yeah, actually they announced several years before.
Mm-hmm. And at least 10 or 12 years before that, there was conversations just being made about this would be an area where that kind of development would want to have it occur. Mm-hmm. I think for us, it was, it's not surprising that we weren't invited to the table because we have a very particular stance. Mm-hmm. And that is, we do not want tax dollars, public funding to go into playgrounds for the rich. Mm. And if it does not lift up the lives of the people of San Antonio and there's not an equitable benefit for all of the citizenry of San Antonio, then it's not a good investment. Mm-hmm. And so what we would do is we would hold their feet to the fire. Mm. And so it didn't surprise me that we weren't invited early on. But we were very glad to push our way to the table.
I'd like to take just a moment. I think we always assume that our listeners and our viewers are always totally up to date and completely filled on everything we're talking about. Tell us about, just quickly, about COPS Metro, who you are and what you do. And then we can get back to the stadium.
Sure. Well, COPS Metro is an organization made up of institutions. There's no individual membership. Mm-hmm. And so we have 30 institutions that pay dues that are members of the organization. And, we're a nonprofit, so we don't endorse candidates, but we do endorse our own
interest.
Yeah, our own policies and desires for the communities, et cetera. And we were founded 50 years ago, 1974. By Ernesto Cortez Jr., who was an Industrial Areas Foundation organizer. So we're based on those principles of local organizing.
And I think when we look at the 50-year history of COPS Metro Alliance, just so that people are aware, what we've been able to do is address issues of inequality and injustice, where there has not been representation of the citizenry on the east, south, and west sides of San Antonio on the city council. We were able to shift that and make sure that our voices were heard. In addition to equitable distribution of resources for streets, for drainage, And in our first 25 years, a lot of focus was on how do we rebuild our communities that have been neglected for decades upon decades upon decades. And then 25 years ago, a huge shift was made in the sense that we wanted to focus on the development of the people of San Antonio. So 25 years ago, we kind of focused the city on considering what efforts are being made to lift up our people, to prepare them to handle through workforce development, through education, and through participation in the life of the city, to lift up their individual families and the larger community. So that has been the strategy of what we do. And I know I've been associated with it for now 38 years. I actually began my association when I was serving as a San Antonio police officer. And as a San Antonio police officer, I could see the inequities. And I remember being called by the Sisters of the Holy Spirit and Mary Immaculate on the east side. They just said, Officer Drennan, rather than simply responding to the troubles here in this community, would you like to help solve them? And they really challenged me to take my life and focus it in that direction. And so that's what we've done for the past 50 years and what we plan on doing for the next 50 years. And if someone were to say, can you just give me a one line, what is COPS Metro? I'd say this: we are the conscience of the city council, the leadership of this city, and our city itself. We like to consider ourselves our conscience.
And honestly, we were, when we started, we were primarily on the west side. And we today have representation institutions in all 9 council districts.
Now, it's mostly organized along kind of a parish basis, correct? Right.
Institutional.
Okay. Some of those being parishes.
Yeah, many of them.
Mainly, but not exclusively.
Okay. To get back to the stadium agreement, so we have the letter of intent. We find out about that in July. In August, there is a memorandum of understanding between the city, county, and the owner of the missions. It's at that point that we become aware of COPS Metro's interest. Tell us what happened between July and then, when this broke into the public.
I think that there are several things that started happening. One was there was conversation about this is not a bad idea. Okay, so maybe it's not a bad idea. We didn't have a position one way or the other. But where's the money going to come to pay for it? Now we're talking the public. Where is this money going to come from? And what's going to happen to that community around there? And that's when we started engaging with some of the people who live in the soap factory, for example. And that's when we also started engaging on this topic with the San Antonio ISD School Board and the superintendent, because they were going to be affected as well. So that's where we started.
So I'd like to jump in and say, so the soap factory, this is, it's a 381-unit apartment complex owned by Weston Urban, whose principals, Graham Weston and Randy Smith, are also owners of the missions. Part of what's going to bring this stadium about, if it ever happens, is development around the stadium, including at what is now the soap factory. The plan is to raise this apartment this is really the crux of I think COPS Metro's involvement. This apartment complex, which doesn't charge crazy rents for downtown. I mean, they're relatively affordable, if not technically, affordable housing. And it's a lot of downtown employees live there. The idea is that private development, like hotels, restaurants, apartments on this site, will ultimately pay for the construction of the stadium. Now, kind of walk us through your discussions with soap factory residents. What were you hearing from them, and what came out of that?
Well, there was extreme dissatisfaction. There was a lot of fear. Because they were trying to figure out, where are we going to find another place? Most of them work downtown. So where are we going to find similar apartments that are affordable? And even if we find something, how do we how do we pay for that? How do we make the down payment? How do we, the application fee? I mean, who's going to move us? And so they started raising some very valid issues that even if they were moved to another location, that there were a lot of expenses related to that. So yes, we did have some conversations with them. Clearly, their preference is to stop the stadium and stop the raising of the soap factory apartments. But as we explained to them, and we say quite frankly, it's privately owned. In fact, they can do whatever they want to do. It may not be the right thing to do, and we may not support the way they're doing it. But the reality is, it's privately owned.
One of the community benefits you all really pushed for was to get a $2,500 moving stipend for soap factory residents. And you've kind of touted that as one of the wins. Half of that money, though, there's about $500,000 that's going to go to fund that. But half of that is coming from the city and the rest is coming from Weston Urban. Do you wish you all had pushed harder for Weston Urban to pay for all of those moving stipend costs?
No, it's not over. I mean, it hasn't even started yet. This process hasn't started. We're not about to let them off the hook.
And we didn't in any way suggest that half of this come from the city of San Antonio. This is something that was reported to us by one of the assistant city managers, that we happen to have this additional funding that we can use for this. I want to make sure that the $2,500 per unit is not for the moving cost, because the moving cost is going to be covered as well. The relocation fees, the application fees and so forth. But these are for all the other incidentals that occur when a family has to move from one location to another. And so it's not over. We did not ask that the city come up with that money. We looked Western Urban and we said, you need to come up with this. Because up until our voice came into the conversation, they were talking about covering the application fee.
Period.
That was it. No additional cost, nothing. And so what we want the best possible outcome for the citizenry. But it speaks to the larger issue, and that is affordable housing. Are we going to be a city that creates opportunities for all of our citizens with affordable housing, and not affordable housing at the extremes of the city, but in the heart of the city where people work, where people's children go to school. And I think that's the bigger fight. So this was an accomplishment to bring Western Urban and the city to the table, to listen to us, to call us to the table. But it's not over with yet. I think we still have much more to do on that front. But I think it does touch base to a larger issue, and one that we're going to face because we have a history, as so many cities do, of displacing families from urban centers. And the Hemisfair Park is a perfect example of the displacement in the late 1960s of thousands of families from the city center and creating displacement there. And so we have a long history of it. And if this is going to occur through this private development, and any public funds are going to be used, and we've already been told that public funds are going to become a part of this, we need to make sure that the citizenry of San Antonio benefit, that this is truly seen as a benefit for our community. Otherwise, we could never support the use of public dollars simply to create a high-dollar playground for the wealthy.
With Weston Urban and the baseball stadium deal, are there other concessions you all are going to try to get them to make, or are you now focused on other things? Because it seems like a lot of that deal is done. The terms have been agreed to. I haven't seen much more discussion about getting more money for moving stipends, getting them to build affordable housing. I mean, what are you expecting to get out of them in relationship to this deal?
Well, one of the things was that they would definitely make sure that the residents that are displaced at Soap Factory they will help them find a suitable apartment equivalent for them. So all of them will be taken care of, which was our primary concern. that they help, deflect some of the costs, that's fine. But, really, I just never trust the city when it comes to telling us, it's not going to cost y'all a penny. It's not going to cost anything. The citizens are not going to pay.
These are not tax dollars going to this project, even though they actually are tax dollars.
Please give me a break. They find all kinds of interesting ways to have that come back at the citizenry, and that concerns us. And also the issues that have been raised by the San Antonio Independent School District Board. Mm-hmm. Very, very solid questions. And,
So right now, I mean, it's worth pointing out that SAISD's Board of Trustees, just last week, they agreed to five demands, essentially, to sell a 2.3 acre property that is, without it would be really difficult to put together a stadium. They really need this particular property. So SAISD has a lot of leverage among, their demands are, $400,000 a year in payment for effectively the next 30 years, parking garage, a new campus, and guarantee, unclear who would be making the guarantee that there would be dedication to see that more than, I think it was 1,200 affordable housing units are built in the downtown area. Like I said, it's really unclear who would be on the hook for that number of. What does COPS have a position on these demands, and are you talking with SAISD?
We are talking to SAISD. And we said that we would support them in whatever negotiations they go into because it makes sense to us. They have, when you look at what's happening to SAISD, number one, they're not fully funded by the state. Mm-hmm. They've had to close down so many schools because of a diminishing enrollment. And now they're moving families out of their district that go to Fox Tech and the other surrounding schools in that area. So darn right they should be compensated. These are the things that they say they need, and we have to trust that that's actually correct.
I would
say I'm not at all sure that the county is going to be very supportive. From what we've heard, they're willing to talk to them, but they certainly haven't taken a position.
I agree that the San Antonio Independent School District has to continually consider the needs of the students and their families. And I was very excited to see the demands that they placed upon the table. Mm-hmm. They're very good demands. They're well thought out. They help establish a future for the school district in this area. And that's one of the things that I'm afraid that if we don't engage in conversations with SAISD and consider what they're looking at, we are going to have ourselves with a population in the city center without the infrastructure, both in education and in affordable housing and all these areas that won't sustain it.
Why do you think SAISD is really the only governmental entity involved in this deal that's really pushing to extract a community benefit? We really didn't see the City Council or Bexar County Commissioners Court really ask for much more aside from what Weston Urban wanted.
Well, I know. To me, a huge part of it has to do with something that I have spoken about in the past, and that is the memory of our city council. The memory of our city council is shallow at best. It does not carry with it the experiences that we've had in the past. And so often someone enters into public office, they weren't even born when so many of the challenges that we have faced 30 and 40 years ago in the area of both education and economic development in the inner city occurred. And so they believe that the economic development of the city of San Antonio began when they began public office. And so connecting them to a history or a memory of what's going on, I think is key. If they don't have that memory, they're not going to engage for what is possible in the future. And one of the things that we have a great example, and I'm probably something we may talk about in a little bit, but if we go to the Alamo Dome, just as a perfect example, the Alamo Dome, we were promised 33 years ago, as it was being billed to us, as this was going to be an economic boom for the east side of San Antonio, that we were just going to see a transformation of this entire region of the city that would affect everything, including our schools, our neighborhoods, our communities, roads, infrastructure, everything. And we are sitting 30 years later after the Alamo Dome was built. And if you cross the street, you just cross the street from the Alamo Dome and you go east, there is zero economic development there. Right. It has never, ever been brought to fruition. Why the city council isn't looking back at that memory and saying, we have made promises and as a city council, and they've never come to fruition. And we are stuck with this incredibly difficult facility that's used very seldom and zero economic development to really change the lives of the citizens of the east side of San Antonio in any real way. And so if we're looking at this now over here in the city's northwest corner with emissions, again, it just says to me, they don't have a memory. They have no way of going back and saying, in real experience, this is what has happened in the city of San Antonio. I used to go to the Spurs when they played in the arena downtown, and I was there when they raised the roof of the arena.
Hemisfair Arena?
The Hemisfair Arena.
Oh, yeah.
They raised the roof of the Hemisfair Arena at taxpayers' expense. Then we tore that down. We built an Alamo Dome. We are not using that to its full capacity. We built another arena on the east side of San Antonio. And again, if you walk to the edges of those parking lots and you look left and right, there's no economic development. Right. So there are these promises of how the neighborhoods and the communities are going to be transformed by this and lifted up. It's never materialized.
And if you look at the Texas Monthly article recently by Mimi Schwartz, that why, as big as San Antonio is and as popular as it is, why are we still such a poor city? That's part of it.
Now, you'd mentioned that Cops Metro would never support using taxpayer money to build as you called it, a playground for the rich. Do you consider this baseball stadium, as planned, a playground for the rich?
Not so much. Mm-hmm. Not so much.
Okay.
This is much smaller by design. Uh-huh. And it's San Antonio Missions. Yeah, we love the Missions. Yeah, they've been around forever. Yeah, are we going to oppose that? No, we're not.
Do you love the Missions? I'm not a big baseball fan. So.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway. We love our hometown teams.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
but I think that's right. So we're not opposed to it, and it is a small fish to fry. But what we can do is by engaging with all the parties involved and with the city council, making sure that we have a seat at the table. I tell you what, I know that Weston Corps feels very different when they're sitting at the table and we're there, as opposed to when we're not there. And we are going to be advocating for that which benefits the entire citizenry of San Antonio. And again, we could be fooling ourselves by saying, well, this isn't going to be paid with taxpayer dollars. These districts that they're creating, these zones, those are tax dollars that could be going to the city of San Antonio to fund street repairs, park repairs, improving our neighborhoods, economic development through the development of our people, all of that. And it's going to pay off the stadium. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that all the other components that include living wages, that include an ability for individuals who start working there, they can move up, that it's going to affect the lives of the people of San Antonio. That's where we want to be playing ball, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your talks with SAISD trustees, do you get a sense of how they're leaning? Let's start out by, do you get a sense of how talks are going with Weston Urban, the county, and the city, and the school district?
We haven't heard very much about where they are.
Okay.
And I'm not, their deadline is coming up,
right.
for fairly soon. Mm-hmm. But it was a gutsy move on their behalf, and we applaud them for it.
Absolutely.
Our assumption is that, they set some pretty high pieces in there that are going to be extremely expensive that probably will go by the wayside. But, from a negotiating standpoint, they're in a very good position.
Are there any demands that they've asked for that you hope they do meet? They had a number. Are there any?
All of them.
I hope they get all
But
of
I
them.
mean, obviously, the building of a new school, the rather than it come through taxpayers, that be funded, is something that I know that we would like to see. I think what they did was very wise. They're holding some of the most important cards at that table. Mm-hmm. They really are, and they deserve. And what they're asking for in the entire scheme of the kind of money that's going to be generated in this area is nothing. It's minuscule when you consider the amount of money that's going to be generated over the next 10, 15 years in this development, this economic development. And so I think it's wise for them to ask for what not only they want, but what they need and what they deserve.
Right. Now, I think it's I'm told it's relatively cheap to go to a missions ball game. Mm-hmm. Much less so to go to a Spurs game. That might be closer to the playground for the rich than a minor league, AA minor league baseball stadium. Yeah. Now, on September 12th, when City Council approved this memorandum of understanding with the county and the missions owner, you stood up and said, we were frozen out. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but the COPS Metro was frozen out, not told how these talks had progressed, and that when it came to the Spurs and discussions of a new arena at Hemisfair for the Spurs, like COPS Metro would be at the table. Are you at the table? Because it's underway.
Well, I'd like to say maybe we've come to believe and realize that while I was asking that, while I was directly addressing the mayor, the city council, and the city manager, that when it comes to this, they'd already been at the table with them. Uh-huh. So there have already been discussions. It's obvious that for the past year and a half, 2 years, there have been discussions, and there have been agreements, non-disclosure agreements, and so forth, already signed, and so forth. So when I was asking that, they were already at the table. And so they had to find a place, an entry ramp for us to come to the table. Mm-hmm. And I will say that we were invited, and we met with, COPS Metro met with Eric Walsh 3 days before the meeting with the city council.
So last Monday.
Yeah. Okay. Last Monday evening, we met with him, and the mayor stopped by just to assure us that the meeting was progressing, and we were able to be informed on what was being presented to the city council. Again, we would be fools to believe that we are at the beginning. We were invited at the beginning point. We were not. Much of this had been discussed, and again, these non-disclosure agreements had been signed, and they had been progressing. And so when it's presented to the city council on Thursday, we had already heard most of what was being presented. It was going to be a bird's eye view of a vision of what could possibly occur. But all of a sudden, the city council seems to be wanting to attach meat to this vision, and I want them to approach this more skeptical, more at least with a vision of, again, how are these decisions going to positively affect the citizenry of San Antonio? How's it going to look?
Or negatively.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're going to be paying for things. When they talk about infrastructure and the new, walk bridges and the new streets and all this, right. Well, where do you think that money's going to come from?
Right.
That's going to come from the same old places where we've been, trying to get as much money as we can for all of our communities, because they need so much work done. And we asked very directly, is that money that should be going to our community now going to be directed to this entertainment sports center? And the answer was yes. Mm-hmm. So
unequivocally,
who pays and who benefits?
And I mean, it's worth noting that if a Spurs arena is built, it'll be at Hemisfair, and it'll basically be the linchpin for what's kind of known as Project Marvel, which is this gigantic sports and entertainment district. Could cost anywhere from $1 billion, and it's not going to be $1 billion to $3 billion. Much closer, much closer to this, and will include expansion of the convention center, upgrading Alamo Dome, private development, housing, new convention center, a lot. It entails a ton, including hundreds of millions of dollars infrastructure improvements around that site. Now, you could look at that and say most of that property is it's owned by public entities. Right now, it's UTSA. Mm-hmm. They control ITC, the Institute for Texts and Cultures. Most of it's city owned. There's some federal government ownership. That it's not such a big deal, and you're not risking the raising of affordable housing close by as you are with the Missions Project. What do you say to that? Is it something we need to not have our hackles up about?
Well, I think you need to look at it, and this is the danger of looking at it piecemeal. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone disagrees that we do not have a world-class convention center. Does that need to be, expanded, whatever? Yeah, sure, that's fine. Mm-hmm. When you look at what the plans are, so you've got this happening. The Spurs, the convention center, new hotels and everything in this center. But then you've got the development going on around the Alamo, and then you've got all of this new development going on. That just about covers the city, the downtown of San Antonio. Mm-hmm. We're known for being a culturally unique city. People come to downtown, not just, from the outside, but people that live in the city come to downtown for all kinds of things. And they're really changing the character and the culture, the legacy, of San Antonio as we've always known it. And so all of these things combined will make a huge impact on our taxes, on the character of the city. But also, what about the people who live in the surrounding areas? We're not that far away. Yeah. Our parish is just not that far away. So we have to think about what's going to be happening there. And, we have relatives that live in the Lavaca area. That's going to be greatly impacted. Mm-hmm. So it's not as innocent as it appears. Uh-huh. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more depth. There's a lot more expenses. And while, we were happy to get a bird's eye view, a couple of days before City Council. I mean, the Express had a great picture of, the owners and the developers and the university presidents all lined up, sitting in front of City Council. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me it's not a done deal to some extent.
Yes.
So where do you all go from here? I mean, what are you going to be asking for, both of the mayor, the city manager, and then all 10 council members who you've been critical of some of their initial reactions to this deal?
Well, the expectation, I believe, is that they need to look at this with a very critical eye. They need to connect it to our history. What has happened time and time and time again when we have built something near the downtown area and it has not lifted or benefited the citizenry of San Antonio. I want them to know our history, know what has happened, know how many, literally promises have been broken in our history downtown. I do think, though, that as we look at this, I have to be very careful as a priest when I preach, because I am in a very pro-San Antonio Spurs parish. And I am pro-San Antonio Spurs. We all are.
Where's your parish?
The St. Margaret Mary Catholic Church. It's just, it is a stone's throw, 2 exits down from the Alamo Dome. Oh. So I'm just 2 exits south of the Alamo Dome. So I say this because and if there's a San Antonio Spur listening to what I'm saying right now, know that our people and myself, we love the San Antonio Spurs. We really do. But I must say, though, that this past Sunday when I preached, I told them, I said, as an organization, we are going to be addressing this. As an institution, we're going to be addressing this because we have been assured that when this project, if approved, progresses, the monies that we have been waiting for, and I'm talking not just for 10 years, 20 years, I'm talking about 50 and 60 years, neighborhoods in our parish that have never had a curb, have never had a sidewalk, and their roads are in front of their homes are in horrific conditions. The safety and security of our neighborhoods are challenged at best with the amount of gunfire, the amount of violence occurring in our communities. I said, none of that's going to be addressed because the funds that we have been working to have allocated for us, they're going to go to this endeavor. So I said, we have to have a voice. And so I am appreciative of the fact that Eric Walsh and Mayor Ron Nirenberg are saying, okay, we're going to bring you to the table now. We know they've been meeting. We know decisions have been made. But what we want to do is we want to make sure we have a voice, because if we do not do something different, then the same thing I explained to you that occurred with the Alamo Dome right across the street. And they say that I thought it was real interesting how it was presented, that this land bridge, and it's not a bridge, people, it's a continent. Right. This part that's going to go from the Alamo Dome to the Hemisphere and connect these two, they say it's going to connect the east side of San Antonio. No, it's not. It's going to connect the Alamo Dome. You know, a building that has been an eyesore and a struggle for our city for the past 30 years. It's going to connect this institution to the Hemisphere. I don't want us to have a body of people on the east side, the south side, and the west side of San Antonio peering from their neighborhoods into this incredibly developed, manicured, safe and secure community that they can't afford to attend because they're still living with poverty wages, in impoverished conditions. It can't be that way.
Now, the city will maintain that the funding they've received so far to study this land bridge you're talking about that would connect, and they'll say somewhere around, yeah, I know, somewhere around the. I'm telling you what they're going to say.
Yes.
Around the Alamo Dome to Hemisphere, right? That they're tapping to study that and get this project in motion. And it may not be viable, but if it gets moving, it's starting here. Those funds are coming from a federal program its intent is to kind of reconnect minority communities that were cut off from downtown areas or more prosperous areas of a city by highway construction in the 50s and 60s, and that's what we've got here. It sounds like you are dubious of this, to say
seriously.
Well,
so you just don't believe that. You don't believe that's the intent.
Not for a second.
Okay.
Between the land bridge that they're talking about creating is the Alamo Dome. The people are on the other side of the Alamo Dome. They're never going to be able to access that land bridge. Mm-hmm. This is not connecting the east side of the San Antonio to this economic development. What will? Living wages, good housing. These are the things that will connect the people of San Antonio and give them access to these types of amenities. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that we go back to that if we want to see this economic development that they're talking about through this truly affect San Antonio, it's got to affect the lives of everyone and not just a small sliver.
Now, you'd mentioned city councils not being great with history, but you don't have to be that great to remember the Frost Bank Center.
Amen.
Right. So this is county owned. Went to voters in 1999. It was before my time. I got here in 2000.
There you go.
2000. So I think it was 1999. If not, I'll correct it next time. Supporters of this tax that built the dome, or the Frost Bank Center, they never said that this was going to bring prosperity to the east side, but it was kind of an implicit thing, and obviously that never happened. It's kind of barren. It's basically a warehouse district out there.
You drive in and you drive out.
Right. Now, County Judge Peter Sakai, who found out about this project a little more than a year ago by the Express News. We broke the story, and that's how he learned about it. He had not been briefed by the city or the Spurs. It's a county-owned facility, and Spurs, they're the anchor tenant. Now, he's talked some about supporting a Spurs arena for Hemisfair as long as there's something that the city and the Spurs and the county can do for the east side. And it's unclear what that means, whether that means improving the site of the Frost Bank Center and Freeman Coliseum itself, if it's the roadways around it, infrastructure improvements, we're not sure. Has Cops Metro talked with Sakai about what those benefits for the east side might be?
At this point, we really haven't. That's one of the conversations that we're hoping to have with him fairly soon. There's a whole long list. But this one is particularly difficult because even if they're given, even if there's some kind of resources that are made available to do some of those things, it's still not going to help in 2032 when that place is going to be open. It's going to be just like Nelson Wolf. It's going to be just like the Alamo Dome. They're sitting there. So I don't know that any kind of development at this point would make a whole lot of sense.
And the truth of the matter is, if there has not been any type of development in the past 25 years while the Spurs were there, if they were not able to get Spur economic development with the Spurs being there as the primary tenant, when the Spurs are out, that's going to be one of the most difficult and challenging experiences we're going to have. Because when you look at where people who come to San Antonio want to go, it is in the SeaWorld Fiesta Texas area on the northwest side of San Antonio. It's in the downtown area. And you have to ask yourself, how are we going to work? And we should be working with the county. How is the city and the county going to work together to showcase that in some way? And it's going to take creativity. And there's some creativity on that city council, and there's some in the county commissioners, but the vast majority of the creativity of San Antonio is in the people who live in that neighborhood. And they better sit down and talk to the people who live on the east side of San Antonio, because they're the people who know that community best. And again, if we don't do that, if we don't engage the community, and we let this be done by developers who don't live in the state of Texas, who are investors who don't live in the state of Texas, behind closed doors at conference room tables where we're not welcomed, we don't have a seat, and the citizenry of San Antonio don't have a seat, they're going to end up with a disaster on the east side.
I know Mayor Nierenberg told us last week that one of the reasons they were building this new Spurs arena and the entertainment district around it was because there's fear that the Spurs are going to leave. And you've talked about how much your parishioners love the Spurs. Given that always that fear of the Spurs going, and that kind of threat they have over the city and the county, how much leverage do the governing bodies really have in extracting benefits out of a deal like this?
Well, I think I do agree with you. I think that there is a fear. And when the mayor says it, when members of the city council say it, and if the owners ever say that, I think there's real fear. It's not just my parish. The city of San Antonio loves our Spurs. But But I wish they would instead capitalize upon the support we are willing to create for the Spurs in a relationship with them, in a true and authentic relationship. What happened the other day at the city council is a perfect example. After this presentation was made, there was a secret exit for the ownership and the leadership of the San Antonio Spurs it was an escape hatch. They escaped. It was an escape hatch for them, rather than for them to engage with the citizenry of San Antonio, with the people of San Antonio who have supported them. They escaped off to the side. I don't want us to feel like we have to respond out of fear. We are a people that would much rather respond out of hope of what we can accomplish going forward. But we're going to do everything we can as an organization, not to react to fear, but to respond to hope.
But I mean, you're right. It is there.
It's there.
I think y'all have documented very well how this whole notion of having, a 1 or 2 games in Austin. Oh my God, they're thinking about leaving us, ditching San Antonio and going to Austin. If they choose to do that, there is nothing we can do about it. I mean, that's just their reality, right? So you can't operate based on that. I mean, honestly, one of the pivotal conversations that we had with the city manager about a month ago, and we were not talking about Spurs or missions, but we were talking about the needs within the city, and he brought up the need to do something with the convention center, et cetera. And he said, the best we could possibly leverage from all sources is about $2 billion. The entire city of San Antonio, $2 billion. A month later, they're talking about between 6 and 8 billion. We got rich really fast. They found money somewhere. So, the clarity, the transparency that is not there right now is something that we will fight for.
Sonia Rodriguez. Father Drennan, thank you very much. It's been great, and we thank you for your insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I'm surprised if there are any of you left, there might be, who have not signed up for our ENside Politics newsletter. The 1 or 2 of you who have not done so, you can drop to our show notes. There's a link there. Follow the link and get the newsletter. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.